Welcome to Tales from the Fireside by RODEAX and Dan Lee, a collection of grim tales to light your way through the long dark of winter.
I wondered if you would be joining us tonight. Well, don't just stand there. Close the door, shut out the bitter cold. Come, sit, for the story is just about to begin.
Guy Fawkes Night, like any folk holiday worth its salt, celebrates a rather grisly happening indeed. It is a night of collusion and conspiracy, of drama and tragedy, a night where families unite to burn their talisman, a humanoid offering of sack and straw, lifelike and dreadful as the flames lick up its perturbant form. Inevitably, the body is consumed by the fire, blackening in the arid heat, and the children watch, cheeks aglow with the gleam of the flames, eyes wide and mystified, watching the bad man burn. It is a night of anticipation rising in the chest, the air static with excitement, a night of alchemy and allurement, where your hand might slip quietly into that of the figure beside you, and the magic of the flames might draw you closer in the bewitching chill of the evening. Or so it has been in times gone by. Jordan Muntz was a girl similar to many. She was not extraordinary by any measure. She was not particularly kind, nor clever. She had not achieved anything beyond the superficial, and she had not, to my knowledge, affected anyone's lives at all. In short, she was self-absorbed, conceited, and extremely dull, which put her in a very dangerous position. If she were to disappear, she would not be missed by many. At school, she was tumultuous in her need for attention. In lessons, she would giggle in the back row, sharing text messages with a boy across the classroom. Then she would show her friends who were equally as self-absorbed as her. She was the kind of girl who makes other students feel inferior. The kind of girl who might laugh at you for the clothes you wear or the company you keep. And on her phone you would not find pictures of cherished memories, but instead row upon row of self-portraits, taken rambunctiously in bathrooms and hallways and bedrooms, marking no occasion at all. Jordan Muntz was unpleasant through and through. The night brought with it the steady chill of early November. Soon the first frost would set in, ushering flora and fauna into the deep sleep of winter. And as was common on Guy Fawkes Night, Jordan was transfixed before the vanity mirror, applying her makeup in wait of her friends. She slicked her lips with gloss and pouted dramatically at her reflection, tilting her head this way and that to get the best angle. Then, satisfied, she raised her phone and took a picture. Of course, she would have to alter the contrast and remove her blemishes, but by the time she was finished, this was sure to incite jealousy. She smiled internally at the thought and began scrolling through the myriad filters on her phone. That was when she noticed it. A little dark mark on the wall behind her in the photograph. She looked over her shoulder to examine the wall. If she had marked it, her parents were sure to be angry. Perhaps it had happened when she and Chloe had shared that bottle the other night. Much of that escapade had escaped Jordan's memory. However, staring at the wall and comparing it with the photograph, she could notice no stain on its smooth, even surface. She held up her phone and took another self-portrait. Perhaps there was something wrong with her camera. She looked at the new photograph, and yes, there, on the mirror this time, that same dark mark. It was odd. Not just a speck, but almost a streak. And she could swear it was bigger this time. If her phone was damaged, Jordan thought, she would have to force her parents to buy her a new one. Breaking her concentration like a shriek in the night, the doorbell sounded downstairs. The girls had arrived. Jordan stood up and brushed down her clothes. She shook her hair over her shoulder and pouted in the mirror once more to make sure her lips were sufficiently viscous. Then, in a giggling gust, the door flew open and 3 teenage girls poured in. They shrieked and bounced in a cringe-inducing display of excitement. Any of the 4 girls might have looked like they were indulging in a raucous act of friendship. However, if you were to look closely at their eyes, you would see them darting from shoes to clothes to hair, scrutinizing their friends and internally comparing each of them to themselves. Unlike genuine friends, this was a group built solely on superficiality and conceit. So naturally, each girl had a pathological need to be better than the others. There was Liberty Kerr, Chloe Shannon, and Gemma McInerney, all clustered with Jordan, each one done up like a Christmas tree. "Your legs look so thin in that skirt," said Liberty, eyeing up Jordan's pasty knees. "Ugh, you're just saying that," replied Jordan, secretly agreeing with Liberty completely. Then, turning to Chloe, she said, "I love your outfit. It's so autumn." Meanwhile, Gemma had been fiddling with her fringe in the mirror and obnoxiously chewing a globule of gum. She straightened up and struck a pose, examining herself with beady eyes. Then she raised her phone and looked into the camera. "Wait for us!" cried Chloe and scuttled to Gemma's side. She immediately began flicking her hair and fussing like an old hen. Liberty and Jordan joined them, and once the shuffling mass had settled, Gemma took the picture. Had she chosen to look at it before they left the house, she might have noticed the dark mark hovering in the background, somewhere over their shoulders. Outside, night had descended completely, casting the suburban streets into darkness, only illuminated by the glare through curtains and the shafts of yellow light pooling on the pavement beneath street lamps. Ordinarily, these streets were quiet, but tonight was not an ordinary night. Parents ushered their children into cars, and young couples walked with purpose through the gloom. The evening was alive with activity, and the air was already buzzing with the promise of excitement. Together, Jordan, Liberty, Chloe and Gemma caught the next bus into town, and as usual, they procured the entire back seat. They cackled and chattered like a horde of geese, much to the displeasure of their fellow passengers. "Bus selfie!" cried Liberty in a gormless shriek, and the girls all jostled close together. "I have to be in the middle," demanded Jordan, asserting herself as alpha female. "You're literally always in the middle," said Gemma. "Because I'm the prettiest," retorted Jordan, with a sarcastic smile. Liberty raised her phone, and the gaggle posed and pouted as the picture was taken. "Let's see it," demanded Chloe, and Liberty obliged. She brought the photo onto her screen and held it out for all the girls to see. "I'm hot," announced Jordan. Gemma and Chloe made faces at each other behind Jordan's back. "Hey, what's this in the background?" said Liberty as the bus rounded a corner, jostling them this way and that. Liberty peered into the photograph, examining the dark shape in the image. It could be anything. Just a trick of the light, maybe. We all know how the mind can work against us when darkness falls and winter sets in. But sure enough, hovering in the middle of the road was a sullen shape. Gangly, pale, a painfully thin figure stark in the red glow of the bus's tail lights. Of course, the other girls had ignored Liberty's comment completely, far too engrossed in their own little lives. "Oh my God, look at this," said Liberty, suddenly alarmed. The other girls, alerted by Liberty's tones, all peered into the photograph on the screen. "Right there," said Liberty, pointing at the darkness in the photograph. The girls peered closer. "Oh my God, ew!" cried Chloe. "What even is that?" asked Gemma, unimpressed. Jordan peered closer, eyes widening in disbelief. It couldn't be, could it? She snatched the phone from Liberty and held it in both hands, steadying it. The other girls' indignant cries did not reach Jordan's ears, for there, in the middle of the road, directly behind the girls, was that same dark mark. It was the same shape, that narrow streak of darkness, but this time it looked bigger. This time, Jordan could make out narrow limbs, pinched and pale, sallow, naked flesh, and atop the figure's head, a long, straggly mess of black hair. Jordan recoiled in shock. "Oh my God," she uttered, a hand fluttering to her trembling lips. What?" said Gemma, snatching the phone from Jordan's wavering grip. She held the phone up and looked at the photograph unimpressed. "Look at it," said Jordan, shaken. "What? I don't even know what I'm looking at," drawled Gemma, handing the phone back to Liberty. "Calm down." Jordan smiled weakly and pretended not to care. She refused to show weakness and let Gemma win, so she whipped her own phone out and pretended to text. Tilting the screen away from her friends, she scrolled through her own selection of photographs. There it was, as plain as night, that sullen streak in the background of her photographs, always just behind her. Slowly, the bus rattled to a stop, and the girls swept out onto the street, Gemma in the lead. It was a short walk to Greenacre. The town's largest park sat atop a hill, looking out upon the buildings in the distance. From the highest point, one could see the lights of the road spanning for miles, and local tradition had it that in this park was the largest Guy Fawkes festivity in the county. Of course, according to Jordan, only a nobody would go anywhere else. Crackling lights travelled in the air, grasped in the fists of toddlers as watchful parents basked in the precious moments. Teenagers cried out in delight as they chased each other across the grass. The trees were silhouetted against the moon-laden clouds, and in the distance the pyre stood, dry and cool, in wait of the flames. There was music in the air, and distant shrieks wafting down the hill from the fairground. Fast food trailers had pitched up at regular intervals, serving fish and chips, donuts, and countless other guilty delicacies. The scents that wafted through the evening chill were sensational. "I want a donut," declared Liberty. Chloe smirked and teased, "You'll get fat." Liberty simply shrugged. I'll drink a kale smoothie." As it transpired, all of the girls bought donuts, so naturally they had to take photographs of themselves to mark the occasion. They clustered together just in front of the trailer, lights casting a glowing halo behind them. Click. Gemma took a picture. Snap. So did Chloe. Then the girls gaggled together to examine their handiwork. The girls leaned in, feigning an interest in their friends, while each secretly scrutinized their own appearances. All except Jordan. Instead of studying her own form, Jordan nervously cast her eyes over the background of the image. At first she saw nothing. Then, there! It was still behind them, a form of chilling severity amid the unsuspecting crowds of festival-goers. That same figure from before, only this time it was surely closer. "Look at my picture," said Chloe, raising her phone in place of Gemma's. Her photograph was much the same, but ever so slightly closer in. Again, 3 girls studied their own appearances, while Jordan, ashen-faced, peered into the background of the image. "Oh God," she whispered, for there, once again, was the sullen form of that haunted being, closer and closer still. Now Jordan could make out its features. It was a woman, the deep furrows of her cheeks appearing starved and drawn in the stark light of the trailer. Her eyes were cold and hungry, her lips chapped and blue, as if they had never seen a drink. "What?" demanded Gemma, clearly fed up with Jordan's behaviour. "Look," said Jordan weakly, and pointed at the woman in the photograph. The 3 other girls peered closer. Liberty's hand fluttered to her face as she stifled a gasp. Chloe simply stared, glassy-eyed in fear, and even Gemma's stern face cracked as she saw the sullen creature behind them. Jordan quickly looked over her shoulder, and suddenly, fearing for what might be behind them, the other girls followed suit. But scanning the field before them, they could see no sign of the corpse-like woman. "That's what I was trying to tell you earlier," breathed Jordan. "Look at this." She whipped her phone out and brought up the photograph she had taken before her friends had arrived. "In the background," she said, and her friends studied the dark mark that manifested behind her in each photograph. The girls stood silently in the chill of the evening, ignoring the joyous sights and sounds that should have tantalized their senses. Then, in a sudden flurry of motion, Gemma whirled around and snapped a photograph of herself, alone, her friends watching aghast from the other side of the lens. She stared at the photo on her phone. "What did you do that for?" demanded Chloe. "It's not behind me," said Gemma, a sickening grin of triumph spreading across her face. "It's only in photos of Jordan." All girls turned to stare at their friend. Jordan stared back in horror. "What?" she began, but somehow words escaped her. A heavy fear had crept inside her and filled her stomach with lead. "Oh my God, hey!" cried a shrill voice from behind. All 4 girls started at the sound. There, rushing towards them, was a familiar face from school. Jake Persimmon, clad in all of his fashionable finery, strode towards them, grinning like a jack-o'-lantern. "You look fierce," he proclaimed, and raised his phone to face them. Jordan cried out, terror knotting in the pit of her stomach. But it was too late. Jake took the picture, and something inside Jordan snapped. Dread enveloped her. She could not stay here, not with these people. She had to get out. She had to run. Jordan fled her friends, heart hammering in her chest, as her legs pumped, propelling her breathlessly up the hill. If her friends had called after her, she didn't hear them. Gasping for air, she stammered to a stop atop the hill and stared out onto the town spanning below. All around her, shrieks of joy filled the air. Sparklers crackled in the hands of strangers, and the rush of the fairground ride spiraled into the night. Somewhere below her, past the ever-increasing crowds, she could see the flickering glow of fire, as all prepared for the pyre to be lit. Teenagers chortled and grinned, and with a creeping sensation that made her skin crawl, Jordan realized that all around her, in the fairground, Beside the trailers, sparklers in hand, were the hordes of people, all taking photographs to mark their Guy Fawkes memories. Behind her, a child toddled ahead of his parents, face covered in jam and sugar as he giggled into his donut. His parents laughed and beamed with pride, father stopping to capture this precious memory in a photograph. There, by the bumper cars, a young couple handed a phone to a passer-by and stood together as the kindly stranger photographed their first date. Jordan reeled in horror, wondering how many photographs she was in at that very second. With shaking hands, she raised her phone and held her breath as she took a picture. She had to know. She had to see how close that thing had gotten. Perhaps it was still some distance behind her. Perhaps she still had time. Jordan fumbled with her phone, barely keeping her fingers still enough to tap the screen. Then the image manifested. She was thin, so painfully thin and pale as the starving crescent moon. Standing directly behind Jordan, not a foot away, was the ghastly spectre. The figure had crept closer and closer, every snap of a shutter allowing her one more step, until now, immortalized in that terrible image, the woman breathed down Jordan's neck. Jordan spun around in fright. There was nothing behind her, but there, in the photograph, was the thing that haunted her. Her naked form was a revolting bag of bones. Ribs protruded from horribly taut skin. Her skull was all but visible beneath her face, and draped in sickly strands around her shoulders was that long, lank mess of black hair. A single skeletal arm stretched towards Jordan, exposing the starved and sagging form of her bare torso. No sound passed Jordan's lips. The crowds that flooded down the hill towards the burning pyre stopped. Gasps of shock hung in the air as several people rushed over to help. The young boy who took the final picture didn't notice. He was adjusting the contrast of his self-portrait as he wandered down the hill. Jordan's empty body tumbled to the ground and landed spread-eagled in the grass. The people who rushed to help the young woman reeled back in shock as they realised that she was dead. Hadn't she run up the hill just seconds ago? Was she with anyone? Did anyone know her? Later, back at home after the night's festivities, the young boy finally noticed the background of his picture. Some way over his shoulder was a girl, ashen-faced and skeletal, grey as if all of the life had been sucked from her crumbling form. Her fashionable clothes hung against her in ghastly irony, and there, just behind her, just visible over the dead girl's shoulder, was the most beautiful woman the boy had ever seen. Luscious black locks cascaded around her face and down her shoulders. Her skin shone with vitality and youth. Her naked form all but glowed. Of course, the boy was stumped. No one else in the background of the image was paying any heed to the sheer naked beauty standing over the crumbling girl. Something about the image made him feel deeply uncomfortable. It was a long time before he took up a camera again. Gemma, on the other hand, continued to snap self-portraits with tenacity. Since Jordan had disappeared, she had taken on the role of the alpha female and was basking in the glory at every given chance. It took her some time to notice the woman behind her in the photographs. At first she didn't recognise her. With her youth and beauty, the Shutterghast was almost unrecognisable. But as time passed, and as she drew closer and closer, her beauty faded, and she became more and more hideous. Her own vanity spurred her on. She thirsted to be beautiful once more. With every step her hunger grew, until the figure in Gemma's photographs was not beautiful at all. She was skeletal and ghastly, and so ravenous. And so, on this cold November night, my advice to you is this. Your life is finite. Do not waste it in vanity, or you may risk a visit from the Shutterghast.
We hope you've enjoyed tonight's grisly tale. Please join us next time for another adventure into the dark unknown.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fireside, written by Rodeo Whiter and Dan Lee, and produced by RODEAX.